She's got a fetish for fine art. A pair of knee socks and an oversized sweatshirt. Yeah, she goes right to my heart. She comes a knocking with a stocking and I get her. I get the feeling I'm in deep. In trouble waters, but they're only thigh high. This kind of girl don't get no sleep. Don't wake your father, slip the starters, strippers got us. Oh my, oh my.
Hi, what up? We're not really streaming today. I just was drawing and I was like, might as well turn on live. Why the heck not? Get my numbers up. I didn't feel like getting my phone from the other room. Plus, it's like not charged. So, I'm not bothering to set up the tracking. And I couldn't remember how to bring my PNG model back up, so I'm like, what the frig ever, we're gonna use Live 2D or VTube Studio, and it's just gonna look like this. It's fine. It's fine. It's alright. Whatever. Thank you for the sub. Yeah, almost 1 whole year. That's crazy. 40 months, almost 1 whole year. Not live 2D still whatever, drawing with an audience. Yeah, that's basically it. I was just yeah, no, I couldn't I don't remember how to get my reactive PNG. I don't remember where it is. I don't remember how to add it to the thing. I didn't want to bother to look into that. I'm just really lazy and sleepy today. We're also not gonna be alive for too long. Cause I got things to do. I got a lot to do. But it's early, you know? It's morning. I'm still cozy, lazy, waking up. I woke up a few hours ago, but still, you know, I'm still waking up. You know how it is. So I was just drawing a little bit, working on the new, oh my god, I'm moving. Phew. I feel like I should be emoting, right? And like stuff because I'm live. So I moved to look towards the little Maritachi in the corner, but I'm not moving, obviously. The tracking's not connected. Oh my god. Okay, anyways, the little guy in the corner. Oh, working on him. Making a new one. I've been wanting to make a new one for like 2 years, and I keep stopping. Yeah, well, sometimes that's just how it be, okay? Want to go back to sleep? Have a little nappy in the middle of work. I used to do that. Just like hide away somewhere, curl up and have a little quick nappy nap. Nobody will even notice. But yeah, I wasn't gonna stream today. I just felt like, you know, might as well turn it on. I don't feel like getting the tracking set up. I don't know where the reactive PNG is. So this is what we're dealing with. And that's fine. I'm just gonna be drawing a little bit. I'm not gonna talk too much unless you guys have something to say to me, or you know, it's just a chill time. We're listening to music. Maybe we'll listen to a murder podcast. I don't know. I can actually take a nap at work because I'm by myself at work. Have a nap. Lay down and have a nappy nap. Just a little, like 10, 20 minutes, half hour, right? Isn't it supposed to be like really healthy to have like a 15-minute nap? But like not a long nap? Just a short one? Like game Gamble with Friends. Recommend the game Gamble with Friends. Is that on Discord or Stream? Steam? Words are hard today. You work from home too? I've napped, did laundry, showered, and grocery shopped on the clock. Nice. And if you're not working from home, doesn't mean you can't have a nap. I used to have naps at work all the time. You know, like I would go hide somewhere behind some boxes or like under a clothing rack and like go on my phone or have a snack or have a nap. You know? Waller? I have to get my Waller. I was not prepared for this. Beauty. So I'm gonna take my multivitamin. Oh my god, what I wanted to do today was, well, I meant to do it yesterday. I did so today. I will fix my mic, or I will try to adjust the mic settings to make it sound good before next stream, and then forgot until just now. Oh, I guess I'll do that later. I'll take my multivitamin. Okay. You clear this wasn't a planned stream? Yeah. This is a very, on a whim. You've been working from home for 6 years? Laid out cardboard like a hobo? Wait, are you actually right now having a nap? Okay. Have a nappy and listen, watch some art. Okay, perfect. Move me a little bit. I'm a little out of the way of chat. Mickey D's. Oh. Good boy. Mickey's breakfast burritos, nice. I've never had. I like the little sandwich thingy. They have the breakfast sandwich thingy with the egg and the it's like the is it on like an English muffin or something, and it's like sweet. It's I like that one. I love McDonald's breakfast stuff, but it's always really hard for me to get the McDonald's breakfast stuff because, yeah, McGriddle, yeah, that's the one. But it's really hard for me to get McDonald's breakfast stuff because by the time I get there, it's already too late and it's always gone. But yeah, that and the sausages and I love the pancakes and the hash browns. I wish that McDonald's had breakfast all day long, because those are their best items besides the fries, obviously. Fries are good too. Awesome, Meowdy, hello. A pile of money I wasn't expecting. Fantastic. Send it all over to me. Just inject it right into my bank. Thank you. I'm just gonna move the screen because the little flying girl is annoying me again. I just have to find where that is. Wait, does this work? No. Alright. Okay. Move this down. Great. I will move up in just a second. I just gotta adjust this first on the other screen. Where is there were a few things that I had to fix for stream. Yeah, I wanted to look into something. Like the pop-up for the redeems again. Because it never works. It like works for a day and then it disconnects. It's always really annoying. I'm also worried that pop-ups for like follows stuff don't show something. I mean, the sub definitely did. Where is this thing? Here it is. That's different. That's so okay. Alright. It is different. Also. Huh. That should be good. Alright. Now that that's adjusted, I will drink my water. Also, Soyuz redeemed a chat hydrate for everyone, so everybody make sure to take a drink of water. Do it right now. Don't disobey me. Super upsetty right now. I really want the giant Uncrustables. I remember just getting the lunch in school, but they're not for sale to individuals. What? I don't remember having Uncrustables. Can you not get Uncrustables? Don't mind me coughing. I'm trying to mute it before I do. Anyways, back to drawing. You guys are listening to music. I'm gonna be listening to other people talk. I don't think I can let you hear that because the copyright is a no. But maybe we'll listen to a murder podcast after, and I'll let you guys listen to that. If you have a suggestion, actually, for a murder podcast or whatever, a murder video, mystery video, crime, whatever, if you have a recommendation for a specific one that you'd like me to see, send it over on the Discord. Send it on the Discord so that I can actually click on it when I'm ready and it doesn't get lost. Uncrustables for sale in most stores are the small diameter. You don't need much more than that though. You shouldn't be eating too much of that. It's not good for you at all. And I need my Marutatis to all stay very healthy so that they're around a long time to support me and love me and spoil me. Oh, you want one that requires that's a two-hander. Oh. Yeah, but it also has tons of sugar and salt and chemicals, probably. To the drawers. That's less calories than I expected. I forgot to play my video. In general, for one meal, and it sometimes doesn't include protein. True. So true. Have a preference for where the true crime podcasts come from? YouTube, Spotify. Um, YouTube, Spotify is okay too. I just don't understand how to open that from a link. I think I have a few to recommend. Okay. Hello. Oh, hi. Get the stock smells are in, yeah. A little bit. Enjoy lunch. It is very weird not moving. The pieces separate. Mhm. Mhm. I see mouth move for that. It's funny. What? What? For super female today? What for? Hmm? Angie put some things in the stream related chat. I put a bunch of podcast style documentaries and true crime stories in there. These are good ones. Hey. Do you? Okay. Oh yeah, I mean, we're not going to be here for too long, so we'll probably listen to like one video. I told you I got stuff to do. Also, last night it tasted more okay than what just leftovers are better. Oh. Making now a little guy. For 7 hours of content. Yeah, very convenient. Nice.
Push me down into the dirt, twist the screw and make it hurt. Breathing gas and gasoline, I will never be a part of your regime. So I push myself through tears, fly my flag through all my fears. Not one less is what I scream. I will never be a part of your regime. No. Not one less. Y'all make the connection, going viral like a damn infection. Picking up traction, check the inflection. Woo woo woo, it's the health inspection. Yeah, I heard you was sick. Check out my next trick. Yeah, I'ma tell you what I know about the Nan. Hang a 5-2 up on your TV set. The ultimate broski from the hour I was sent. Yeah, I've been to hell and back, cause I was so hell-bent. Being this good is a crime. Sipping my Bud Light Lime. The girls, they think that I'm fine. Yeah, they know it's my time. She's got nothing that I want, nothing that I need. Yeah, you only get one chance. You wanna show off? Come on and show it. I won't miss this. I won't blow it. Woo, woo, woo. You know it. Long Island story. The villain hour. They call me Iron Man. Yeah, I got the power. I turn it up. Aw, yeah. Here's your superstar tonight. Yeah?
Yeah, you know who this is. It is your one and only Keepa in the house. You know how it's going to go down with me. I'm about to tell you, so listen good.
Here I come, a mega idol. All eyes on me, no eyes on you. You think I'm silly? I'm here to save the world. I'm gonna fight, fight till the end. I am a superstar inside the screen so fly. I am the one that you desire day and night. I am a superstar inside the screen so fly. I am the only one, yeah, the Ripper. I was a kid who dreamed to become somebody awesome in this world. But fate really sucked. I had to give up. That's how I lost my way. Then came along a way I could shine, a virtual space where I can roam. You may laugh at me, but that's how things unfolded in this crazy life of mine. I must watch out, there are many rivals waiting to eat me alive. I will not give the stage to anyone. Here I come, a mega idol. All eyes on me, no eyes on you. You think I'm silly? I'm here to save the world. I'm gonna fight, fight till the end. I have intense, bomb igniting thoughts. They will create shockwaves in your brain. No matter what, the circus must go on. We're in this crazy world together, you and me. I am a superstar inside the screen so fly. I am the one that you desire day and night. I am a superstar inside the screen so fly. I am the only one, yeah, the Ripper.
Even if the darkness gets a hold,
Never trust with the aux cord? Why?
I'll be the shining star to light the
Why?
We all have scars inside and nights of tears, and that's okay.
You don't like Ken Ashford playlist?
Part of me eternally. Here I come, a mega idol. All eyes on me, no eyes on you. You think I'm silly? I'm here to save the world. I'm gonna fight, fight till the end. I have intense, bomb igniting thoughts. They will create shockwaves in your brain. No matter what, the circus must go on. We're in this crazy world together, you and me. So don't let go and just be awesome. Just be awesome. I am a superstar inside the screen so fly. I am the one that you desire day and night. I am a superstar inside the screen so fly. I am the only one, yeah, the Ripper. A rolling sky and let your reader follow. The adolescent pounding of a simple heart. A simple truth that may be hard to swallow. It's all natural, you knew it from the start. This intimacy slowly seeps in. They merge memories of so fleeting. Can't help it, I still want it. Spin the
Having heard your taste in music, I assume you'd put on some kind of music for toddlers. Did you guys want to listen to toddler techno? Is that it? You guys want to listen to toddler techno today, or what? Are you asking? I mean, if you ask nicely enough, I guess I can put that on for you, Shala. Jesus, you're supposed to be sleeping. Go have your nappy. It's nappy time. No, no, no. You're supposed to be napping. It's nappy time. Go to sleep. Mm. Mm.
I wanna be wanted, I wanna be loved, I wanna just fall asleep at night and pray that you're making it up. I'm living the nightmare, cause I'm living the dream. It's not about anything I want, it's about what I need. Oh, I'm broken, trust, devotion, life's an ocean, and I'm drowning. Oh, I can't breathe, it's you I need. Oh, please don't leave, I need you, God, I need you. Take hold of my chains and lift me up when I'm not strong. Take what remains at your cause where I belong. I'm on my knees, but when it's you, I know that it's not wrong. Please protect me. I love you if you let me. I know there's something there to say. So sign my life away. Moments on my lips like Cabernet, and I'm okay when I'm your slave. I wanna be wanted, I wanna be loved, I wanna pin all my hopes on you, that I'll stay true, and I pray it's enough.
Can I even hear that? The pipe? Yeah. The music? No, that's for you guys.
But I can't find no reprieve. Oh, I'm broken, trust, devotion, life's an ocean. Oh God, I'm drowning once again. Oh, it's you I need. Oh,
Yeah, I heard the metal pipe. I heard it.
I need you. Take hold of my chains, lift me up when I'm not strong. Take what remains at your cause where I belong. I'm on my knees, but when it's you, I know that it's not wrong. I need you, I miss you, I love you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks. Nice.
Please protect me. I love you if you let me. I know there's something there to save. So sign my life away. Moments on my lips like Cabernet, and I'm okay when I'm your slave. Sitting in silence, I felt your embrace. Covenants binding, wrapped up in lace. Things that I hope for, things that I pray. Make me your only, make me your slave.
Drink.
I'm okay when I'm your slave. Yeah, I'm okay when I'm your
Ugh.
slave.
I haven't really decided how I want to animate it at all. It's still, a little bit of movement, but I haven't really decided exactly what I'm gonna do yet.
City streets and tourniquets, puppet strings and marionettes.
I'll start with the talking one though. It was water. It was water. I only have water with me right now. Going out with moving. When
push me out into the dirt, twist the screw and make it hurt. Breathing gas and gasoline. Now I'll never be a part of your regime. So I push myself through tears, fly my flag through all my fears. Not one less is what I scream. I will never be a part of your regime.
I want a mid. Ugh. But the tails in their own folder. Tails. To write this down. I always forget what pen I'm using. Just wanna not forget what pen I'm using, because it always screws up my drawings. And I can't go back to them because I never remember what pen I used. And the size. I really like this pen though. It's from when I've started using the program, it's been my favorite, one of my favorites. Yeah, those are the tail layers. Good, good, good. Tails.
Two-way mirrors, white chapels and white walls fade away to green. Looking at the white bear falling, the promises we made, the promises we'll keep. They set fire to the forest, hoping they would catch the bear. I'm as guilty as they promised. All the leaves did turn black as we weathered out the storm. Keep me safe and keep me warm. Why won't you tell me? Why won't you talk to me at all? Your face stuck to your phone, so we're like lilies. Well, we'll still grow without the sun. No, we won't be alone. Hold our hearts off to them. Those petty high school calls fade away to dreams. Looking at the
What else should move?
the promises we made, the promises we'll keep. They set fire
Hmm.
They set fire to the forest. I'm as guilty as the promised. All the lilies did turn black as we weathered out the storm. Keep me safe, keep me warm.
I wonder if I should separate the
The
face.
image of my fantasies, yeah.
Separate.
Long hair,
Separate the
purple
face.
eyes, and two big pointy ears. The dwarven nails on me. Maybe you as well, girl.
God, I wish it was
Now I didn't expect
stupid
what
double
bird
click.
next made my head spin so fast.
What
It'll
the
break next, she said.
Hey bitch, what's up? You're the kind of girl that could give me the good long suck, and I don't need first name basis. Maybe we could pass it to each other on the third and fourth bases.
Well, what the hell? She got my mind fucked like a Ladriel.
And I can see that we're thirsty. Call it intuition, but it ain't just our glasses that's sturdy.
And I was proud to carry it upstairs, and I was thinking about asking it for 3 hairs, yeah. So here's a little secret to this.
Wish. Okay.
Think I'm kinda crass, but baby, you can kiss my ass. We're shameless. Stacy's mom can join in too. That's right. I delight in being lewd.
Okay, settle down. I don't even know your name.
Our name.
Okay, that's a lovely name.
My name's Kaina.
That's also a lovely name. Wait, when did you get here?
Yeah, Renee and Kalena, you don't have to explain. I know exactly what you're doing. But how far ahead did you plan all of this doing?
Cut that pussy shit. Get up on that pussy, bitch. Call me mistress like you know that you're working it.
Yes, miss.
Put the collar on and pose. 1 bitch boy and 2 elf hoes.
Well, what the hell? We got this far, so we might as well. And things were getting kind of kinky. Essentially, the concept of a heckama doujin. Imagine the scene. 3 bodies all together, me in between, yeah. Pressing up against my body. Hold up.
That's a little bigger than I was expecting. Which one of us are you using that on?
I love it all. You might think I'm kinda crass, but baby, you can kiss my ass. We're shameless. Stacy's mom can join in too. You gotta love those MILFs, man. I delight in being lewd. If you're into it, just be into it.
The eyes. Goes up there.
I won't say I'm sorry for liking lewd elf girls and futanari.
You ready to go again, kiddo?
Yes, indeed I am.
Oh boy.
Oh my tummy started just hurting really suddenly. I think I'm gonna get food.
Fingers trace your skin.
Tummy
All
is hungry.
cliffs and peaks, and your hair it flows like waterfalls. I wanna give some color back to your cheeks. Fingers
I'll go grab a snacky snack.
and as you tell me you can't take it anymore, let our hearts and souls combine. Well, hell is knocking at our door. Mermaids sing to me, he don't love you like I do. He won't take your pain away. You know it's true. I wanna see you smile, wanna see you cry. Oh, you're such a fool. We should get some bruises falling in love. 'Cause I love it when you're blue. Yeah, it's making me mad, knowing I can treat you better than he could. And your tears, they flow like waterfalls, and I don't think they should. Yeah, it's okay to smile, even if inside it's tearing you apart. No, he'll never love you in the way that I do. Why'd you go and give someone like that your heart? Mermaid, sing to me, he don't love you like I do. He won't take your pain away. You know it's true.
I'm back.
I wanna see
I
you
got
smile,
myself
wanna
a
see you
raw hot
cry.
dog.
You're such a fool. We should get some bruises falling in love. 'Cause I love
How
it
y'all feel
when
about
you're
raw dogs? I prefer it. Yeah, cold glizzy's so good. I prefer my glizzies cold and raw. A real big one too. I like when they're dripping with the hot dog water.
blood runs
Mm.
blue.
18 plus years of suffering.
What am I to say?
That doesn't happen from eating a raw dog.
What am I to say? Just tell me what to say. What am I supposed to say? What am I to say? We threw it all away, and we're still blue.
I got a blinking. Got some mouth movement. Good. Okay. Some tail movement. Like I want the ears to swing. But I realized the ear totally blocks the tail. Hmm. I'll make the ears their own. Ears holder. So, let's see.
Say you're a dancer, dance, take no for an answer, no way, I'm just persistent, baby. What can I say? Don't wanna be a black hole of negative emotions, it's true, I wanna be like her, wanna be good to you. Universe, calling out.
I don't even see that part. Okay, that's been on this video. Listen to well recommended podcast or whatever. I tried URL to always automatically add the links as a source. No. That was an accident. Stream related. Unsolved case of the Texarkana Moonlight Murders. Okay. The Lorelai we were lied to about Killdozer. Live TV assassination that shocked the world. And some music. How the internet caught a cannibal. Reddit cracked a 40-year-old case police called impossible. I like unsolved cases. I'll go with the unsolved case. Turn on.
Over the course of 3 months, a man wearing a white sack over his head with holes cut
He
into
just
it for his eyes
jumped
and
right
mouth
into that,
would
huh?
terrorize couples parked in lovers' lanes. He'd appear from out of the dark, his gun trained on the pair, attack the man first, and then go after the woman. This man was never caught, and his true identity is still argued about to this day. And if you're noting the startling similarities to the Zodiac
And this is the unsolved case of the Texarkana Moonlight Murders.
Killer, you're not alone. Except that all of this happened 2 decades before the Zodiac Killer ever showed up in California. Before these events were over, Texarkana would lose its innocence and gain a bogeyman. I'm
Grab some crackers. I should have had that while eating my hot dog, but I didn't. Y'all don't know how much I love crackers. Just plain ones with salt. God, I love them.
Texarkana
They're so good.
is one name for 2 twin cities. You have Texarkana, Texas, part of Bowie County, which sits on that state's extreme northeastern border, and Texarkana, Arkansas, part of Miller County, which sits on that state's southwestern border. Driving south for
I'm
less
sure
than
you
an
guys
hour
love
will get you to
hearing me eat
Louisiana,
crackers.
thus completing the Anna portion of the name. The Strangetown footprint is a result of how railroad towns were naturally designed. Streets just straight out of the railroad depot, and their direction depends on how the railroad sits. In Texarkana's case, the town was built around the place where 2 major railroads met, which was at the Arkansas-Texas state line. Each city has its own mayor, police, fire departments, and municipal government, while sharing utilities and a chamber of commerce. And just to keep everything nice and simple for the federal government, their post office and federal government building literally straddles the border between the 2 states. In the 1920s, Texarkana was a railroad and agricultural processing town, perfectly located for transportation and commercial business. After struggling to get through the Great Depression, the city's economy was bolstered in part by the construction of the Red River Army Depot and the Lone Star ammunition plants. The economy also improved thanks to the establishment of the low-security Federal Correctional Institution on the Texas side, and by the late 1940s, it was a major railroad center of the Southwest, as well as an important commercial and industrial area centered around its timber, agricultural, and mineral deposits. And even before the slayings that would make Texarkana famous in the 1940s, the town was no stranger to violence. This was the South during the Jim Crow era, and any existing tensions between its black and white residents only increased as people of color who had fought in World War II came home with the reasonable belief that, hey, I put my life on the line for this country, maybe I should get the same rights as everyone else. The town's role as a transportation hub also meant that new and different people were constantly passing through the area, including criminals trying to cross state lines. And as the economy recovered, the area's population nearly doubled, bringing both workers and their families and more criminals and their businesses. All this is to say that this was a tough part of the country, and its citizens were used to reading about crime in the newspapers. Between 1940 and 1945, headlines included reports on a woman getting bludgeoned with a car axle and then her throat slit, a 16-year-old boy on parole killing another boy with a glass bottle, a mob of white men abducting and murdering a black man who was visiting from Louisiana, a used car salesman being shot in the head and robbed, and an Army vet's body being found nearly decapitated. Those are just the murders, by the way, and not even all of them. There were also burglaries, knife fights, liquor trafficking, car theft, and even rabid dogs wandering around town in the middle of winter. Of course, not all residents were experiencing that
Okay,
violence
well, the
firsthand, and it certainly wasn't happening
dogs don't
every day.
really mean anything
People
by
were
it.
overall still very trusting of
They're
one
just
another
dogs.
and
And
knew
they're
which
sick.
areas of town to stay away from. Still, the people of Texarkana had gotten used to reading about the worst. As author James Presley states in his verbosely titled book with 2 subtitles, that being The Phantom Killer, Unlocking the Mystery of the Texarkana Serial Murders, The Story of a Town in Terror, in Twin City, Texarkana, crime tormented both sides of the Texas-Arkansas state line. The unexpected had become so common as to lose its ability to surprise. And speaking of things that are utterly no surprise on this channel, we are once again endorsing Fume. Fume is a very simple device invented to help you solve a very simple problem. Just for it is that they mission. If you're ready to break the habit, a free here gives a different light is TP Topper when you order
Just
the
don't
dirty
abuse
pack
it.
today. James Jimmy Hollis was a 25-year-old insurance agent. Tall with glasses, he was in the process of ending a wartime marriage, something not uncommon in the post-war era. His date, on the other hand, was a pretty 19-year-old brunette named Mary Jeanne Larey, and she knew this process all too well. She had just gone through a divorce of her own and saw no reason to refrain from having a social life now that she was single again. Jimmy and Mary had spent the earlier part of that Friday evening, that being February 22nd, 1946, on a double date with Jimmy's younger brother and his date. And depending on who you believe, the couples either watched a film noir called Three Strangers or went to see Lon Chaney Jr. in House of Dracula. Or something completely different.
No.
If the source claimed with absolute certainty that the group saw Avatar The Last Airbender while providing zero sources for that claim, it would match very well with many other aspects of this story. Like, you'd have just the same amount of credibility. Like, to be straightforward with you, most of this script was written by Bethany Watson, who has been doing some phenomenal work for us behind the scenes. But when I was going through and doing my preliminary research, I also was stunned at how much is pure hearsay about this story. What's more important than what movie they went to see, however, is that Jimmy had driven the other couple home, and now he and Mary were all alone. So, he did what you do. He pulled the car to a secluded little side street about 50 feet off Richmond Road so they could spend some more time together in private.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the man appeared. Now, even if he hadn't been pointing a gun at the couple, the attacker still would have looked horrifying. He was wearing what appeared to be a white sack over his head, much like Cleveland Browns fans, in which eye and mouth holes were cut. The couple wasn't able to see much else about him, though, because he was pointing a flashlight directly at them. The masked man then barked orders at Jimmy to remove his pants, while Mary pleaded from inside the car.
I think he was going to do that anyways.
Still attacked. If witness testimony is to be believed, then the man hit Jimmy so hard on the head with his gun that the cracks sounded like gunshots. By this point, Mary was out of the car and was thinking that maybe this guy just wanted cash. Maybe it was just a robbery. So she pulled Jimmy's wallet out of his discarded pants and told the attacker, look, he doesn't have any money. But the man, enraged, accused her of lying and insisted that no, she had a purse. But she didn't. And that's when he hit her with what felt to her like an iron pipe. Shaken as she was by being pistol whipped, Mary was still able to get up, and that's when the man gave her an odd instruction. Run. Whether this was a chance for Mary to escape or just a way for the man to torture her further, she didn't wait around to figure that out. She aimed for a ditch and just took off running, but he yelled after her, "Not that way, go up the road." Odd as that was, Mary stumbled forward in her high heels, even though in the background she could hear her attacker beating and stomping on Jimmy. But then, suddenly, Mary got a glimpse of hope. She saw a car parked on Richmond Road. Unfortunately, it was empty, and so there was no help to be had from whoever might have owned it, and some actually believe that Mary had stumbled upon the attacker's car, which would explain where the driver was at the time. This was not the kind of road that you were just casually parking on to go visit somebody. It was, it was a road for other things. It was for smooching. Devastated, but not yet willing to give up, Mary kept on running, only for her stomach to suddenly drop as she heard footsteps crunching on the road behind her. She looked back to find that the man who just moments ago had been beating the hell out of her boyfriend was now chasing her. And it was an unfair race from the beginning. He easily caught up to her, being as he was not wearing high heels on a gravel road, and infuriatingly demanded, "What the hell are you running for?" Even though, as Mary pointed out to the man, he had told her to do that. Her pointing this out to him caused him to then explode in rage and insist that she was a
taking
liar.
the heels off. What the heck?
Mary so paralyzed
Oh,
with
you
fear
take those
that
heels
she
off.
couldn't move at all. The man then knocked her back to the ground and did things that I can't really say on YouTube. Well, because I can't really say them on YouTube. Which seems like a good time to tell you that any of the stories we can't tell here on YouTube at all, you can find over on Pepperbox, where the Lore Lodge now has a channel. Now, as an assault was going on, we'll put it that way, between the man and Mary, Jimmy was still actually alive back over by the car. He managed to get up and stagger over to Richmond Road, and that's when he signaled a passing motorist. But Mary didn't know that this was happening. In fact, she didn't even know Jimmy was still alive. So, when after the assault was finished and the attacker had disappeared, likely spooked by the approaching car's headlights, the car that Jimmy was able to flag down, Mary got up and ran again, both because she needed to get help for Jimmy and because she believed that her attacker was still right behind her. With that, she ran west for what she believed to be about half a mile before she saw a house. The residents of that house took her in and helped her to call the police, while the person that Jimmy had flagged down managed to help him get to a hospital, where he remained comatose for several weeks because his skull had been fractured in 3 places. Very fortunately, though, both he and Mary survived the encounter. The problem was that when investigators came by to question both of the victims, Jimmy and Mary gave slightly different descriptions of their attacker, and this kind of threw things off from the beginning. Mary believed that the man was black with a light complexion, based at least partially on how she felt like he talked, while Jimmy believed that he was white with a darker, more tan complexion, which, to be honest, are actually very similar descriptions when you consider that the Venn diagram of light-skinned black man and tan-skinned white man have a very large intersection. Of course, considering how sudden, violent, and terrifying the encounter was, it's not surprising that the 2 descriptions aren't identical. Add into that the fact that the man's entire head was covered, and it's kind of a miracle that either of the victims managed to identify anything about him. Despite this, police believed that the differences in Jimmy and Mary's descriptions were suspicious, and those suspicions only deepened when they learned that Mary was estranged from her ex-husband, and they began wondering if her ex was the attacker and if Mary was simply lying about not knowing him. Between that and the lack of any real identifying details, and this being in the 1940s when you had no modern forensic technology, the ordeal kind of just received fleeting attention from a community that was already used to hearing about violence. But that would soon change. 17-year-old Polly Ann Moore had just moved to town about 6 months ago. The previous year, she had graduated from high school early, then moved to Texarkana, where she got a job at Red River Arsenal. But there was also something else new in her life. A guy named Richard. Now, Richard Griffin was a good 12 years older than Polly, and had just received his discharge from the Navy a few months earlier, and was now working as a carpenter. Despite being almost 30 years old, he and 17-year-old Polly had been dating for about 6 weeks, because this was just a different time where that was somehow normal. All that age gap business aside, the two had spent the evening of Saturday, March 23rd, having dinner with Richard's sister, Eleanor, and Eleanor's boyfriend, before seeing the midnight movie at the Paramount Theater. Now, they had reportedly seen Snafu, a comedy about a 14-year-old boy who enlisted in the Marines after lying about his age, but I have a hard time trusting any of these movie sources. After the movie, around 2 o'clock in the morning, and probably after parting ways with Eleanor and her boyfriend, Richard and Polly Ann visited a late-night cafe, but before taking Polly home for the night, Richard drove them over to another, different, secluded lover's lane, this one a dirt road surrounded by trees and darkness, where he pulled his 1941 Oldsmobile sedan over and parked. Their bodies were found later that morning. Both victims of this attack were still in the car. Richard was on his knees between the 2 front seats, his head in his hands. His pants were down with the pockets turned out, likely, or at least making it look like it was likely an attempted robbery. And Polly's body was slumped over in the back seat, but investigators came to conclude that she had been killed outside the car while on a blanket and then put back inside. Both victims had been shot in the back of the head. Unlike the previous crime, nobody survived this one, and there were no witnesses. And to make matters worse, that Sunday morning, rain fell and washed away footprints and other potential evidence. And while we frequently end up covering cases from this time period where the police had a bunch of leads but just didn't bother pursuing any of them, or they went the wrong direction, this is not one of those cases. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Since this happened on the Texas side of the city, the Bowie County Sheriff's Office opened a citywide investigation that included police from both the Texas and Arkansas sides, as well as the Miller County Sheriff's Office, the Texas Department of Public Safety, the FBI, and the Texas Rangers. Unfortunately, this did not automatically translate into a stellar investigation. For one, curious onlookers had been allowed to mosey around the crime scene, their footprints creating a muddy mess and removing any possibility that people would be able to find tracks. And this actually contributed to why the police had a really hard time finding the car keys. It ended up taking a random man in the crowd who was holding his young daughter in his arms to spot them, finding that they had actually been smushed into the mud as people wandered around. Police then further complicated things by
Walking
towing
around
the
the
car to
crime
the
scene
Arkansas
is
police
insane.
station to be analyzed for prints, where they pushed it into a parking space with their bare hands, adding their own fingerprints to the equation. On top of all of this, the bullets were not removed from
think there were
Polly's
a few
skull
cases
because
like
police assumed that the same gun that had shot Richard had likely been used on her too. But while there were a lot of mistakes made very early in the case, investigators did put in the legwork.
back in the day.
By the time the attack was 3 days old, they had already questioned between 50 and 60 people and followed over 100 leads. all of which unfortunately proved to be false. Bullets found at the crime scene were analyzed and found to be from a .32 caliber pistol, thought to be a Colt, and this would have been a pretty popular caliber at the time, but they didn't find a gun, which ruled out a murder-suicide. They also found a patch of dirt that was soaked in blood a little bit over 20 feet away from the car, and they believed that that might have been Polly's, but tests were not conclusive. Unfortunately, they didn't really learn much else because they were low on manpower, they had very little evidence to begin with, and as a result, they just kept coming up empty. Even after posting a $500 reward for information, around $8,700 in the year 2025, no one came forward. Or at least, nobody who had been there that night. Mary Jeanne, one of the first victims, had since moved to Oklahoma, but when she heard about the murders, she got the sense that the killer was probably the same man who had attacked her. So she traveled back to Texarkana to try and help police in any way she could. Unfortunately, in that specific case, the police did ignore this lead and just responded by reiterating their suspicion that they thought she knew her attacker and that she was just lying to them. So, Mary, potentially one of the only people who could have given them any good information on the case this early on, went back to Oklahoma. Now, you might think that 2 attacks on couples in lovers' lanes, one of which left people dead, would spur the town into action, but Texarkana really was such a violent place at the time that this too failed to gain any real attention among the citizens.
Crazy.
It would take a second pair of murders to do that. Spring Lake Park sits about 3 miles north of Texarkana. It was, and still is, a popular spot for families and group events due to the open green spaces, spring-fed lake, and trails. But in the early hours of April 14th, 1946, it would become the backdrop for the next attack. 16-year-old James Paul Martin, who just went by Paul, had lived in Texarkana as a kid before his family moved away. But that weekend, Paul was visiting his old stomping grounds. After school on Friday, and despite his mom's misgivings, he took the car and drove over 100 miles to Texarkana to see old friends, one of them being a girl he'd known since elementary school named Betty Jo Booker. Betty Jo was 15 with dark hair and bright eyes, being one of the few circumstances here where the ages are completely appropriate. And in addition to being popular at school and a good student, Betty also had a part-time job as a saxophonist for the band Jerry Atkins and his Rhythmaires. She wasn't the only young person in the band. The band leader himself, Jerry Atkins, was 16. The band had been passed down to him, so to speak, after the older musicians had gone to war. Now, in this case, the victims of the crime were a little bit different in that they weren't a couple, but rather just old friends. And from the sound of it, Paul was more excited to see Betty Jo than she necessarily realized. Betty had a busy life with many friends and plans that she was juggling, but she had moved things around so she could make time for Paul. That Saturday night, Jerry Atkins and his Rhythmaires had a gig at a VFW club dance, but Betty Jo told Paul that if he picked her up after the gig, they could hang out. And that's what he did. The two saw each other for the first time in years when Betty Jo came out of the VFW with her saxophone case in tow. And that would also be the last time they were seen together. 5 hours after Paul picked Betty up from that dance, his body was found in the Spring Lake Park area. He had been shot 4 times, in the back of the neck, the left shoulder, the right hand, and the face, and his car was then found about a mile away with the keys still in the ignition. It would take about 6 more hours before they found Betty, whose body was a mile away from Paul's and 2 miles away from the car. She too had been shot in the face and the chest, but unlike Paul, she had been otherwise assaulted. The odd part was that her body had then been laid out peacefully, with her coat fully buttoned and her right hand slipped into its pocket. With that, she became the killer's youngest victim at the age of 15. For some reason, whether it was due to the young age of the victims or the fact that this was now a pattern of 3 attacks in the span of just 2 months, each one of them about a month apart from the next, the press was beginning to catch on that something was happening. And
Really?
by this point, they decided they needed a name for this killer. Simply calling his crimes the Texarkana murders would not only be a great way to scare off visitors, but also wouldn't be terribly helpful in delineating these specific murders from all of the other ones in the area.
Right.
Luckily, editor Calvin Sutton at the Texarkana Gazette had a flair for the dramatic and proposed calling him the Phantom. After all, he had been elusive, like a phantom. This was also brilliant marketing because it locked onto a character type that people were already familiar with. At the time, newspapers ran a comic strip featuring a hero in purple called the Phantom. The film The Phantom of the Opera had been in theaters not long before, and a wrestler called the Masked Phantom occasionally showed up
I
in wrestling
don't
matches around
know
the country.
why they give
So
them
now
names that
that they
make
had
them
a pattern
sound
of
cool. Like,
killings
I'm
and
sure
a
they
catchy name for the
enjoy
murderer,
that, you know?
the town actually started paying attention. While the previous two victims hadn't been lifelong Texarkanans and thus didn't get as much attention, Paul and Betty Jo were well known to the community, and more importantly, they were young.
Yeah, they
And it
should
was,
give
of
them
course,
really
becoming
stupid,
increasingly
embarrassing
difficult to
names so
insist
that
that these
they
three
like,
cases, which all
because
shared
they
so
probably
many
get off on it,
characteristics, were not connected.
on
But
being
something
like, yeah,
else
they're
also
calling
forced
me
people
this
to pay
really
attention.
cool thing.
It was a man who had just shown up in town, Captain Manuel T. Gonzalez, or as he was called,
Yeah.
El Lobo Solo, the Lone Wolf. He was a Texas Ranger who had spent
Exactly.
time in the oil fields and along the border, going after bootleggers, drug runners, and other ne'er-do-wells, and he did all of this by himself. This lone wolf character was a natural showman who dressed well and understood how to pose for the press, and he was also popular among reporters because they could count on him for a good quote or two. And if you were a female reporter, he may even have given you a private tour of a crime scene where he would gallantly pose for photos, which he did during this case, but we will get back to that. Anyway, the lone wolf had just arrived in Texarkana to take control of the Texas Rangers part of the investigation, but he was not the only investigator. Bowie County Sheriff Bill Presley had been the first officer to arrive at each of the crime scenes, and the Spring Lake Park double murders weren't any different. Bullet casings found from both murders matched the same caliber of firearm, that being a .32 automatic, and fingerprints were also found, but they didn't match any of the victims and were inconclusive in terms of the surrounding population. Furthermore, Jim Hollis and Mary Jeanne Larry continued to insist to the police that the killer was the same person who had attacked them, but being the 1940s, the concept of serial killers wasn't really a thing yet, so police continued to ignore the idea that a stranger would kill all of these people.
Then they can't
who
enjoy their
all matched
work.
the same profile. I'm going to be honest, half of this job is just looking back at things that happened in the past that just violate every stage of standard operating procedure in a police investigation and shaking my head. In a farmhouse about 10 miles northeast of town, Virgil and Katie Starks were having what must have seemed like a normal, albeit boring, Friday night. At 37, Virgil Starks had the aches and pains of a much older man thanks to his life as a farmer and a welder, and tonight his back was giving him problems again, so he was sitting in the living room with a heating pad on his back, reading the Texarkana Gazette and listening to his wooden shortwave radio. His wife, 36-year-old Katie Starks, had just finished putting away the dinner dishes and was getting ready for bed. Now, if Virgil, as he sat there, had turned around and looked out his front porch window, he might have seen a man with a white sack on his head staring back at him from behind two ragged eye holes.
Creepy.
But Virgil did not see him, and it likely wouldn't have mattered if he had. From the bedroom, Katie suddenly heard glass breaking, and then she ran into the living room to find her husband slumped over in his chair and bleeding. She rushed to the phone to call for help, but before she could finish dialing, she felt something hit her cheek. A bullet had whizzed through the shattered window and passed straight through the right side of her face, exiting from around the back of her left ear. Practically before she could even react, a second bullet hit right under her bottom lip, breaking her jaw before lodging itself under her tongue. And this is when Katie became activated. Despite having just discovered her husband's bloody body and being shot in the face twice, Katie knew that she had to get help. So she dropped to the floor, hoping the gunman wouldn't be able to see her, and then began crawling into the bedroom for safety. That's when she heard the gunman trying to get in through the kitchen window on the other side of the house. Recognizing that if her attacker was in the back of the house, Katie knew that she could then get out through the front. Despite her profound injuries, she stumbled through the living room and out the front door, leaving a trail of blood everywhere she went. Her first thought was to go to her sister's house, which was right across the highway, but when she arrived, she found out that her sister was not at home. Her sister's neighbor, however, was. A.V. Prater lived about 50 feet away, and when he heard all of the commotion and stepped outside to turn on the porch light, he saw Katie standing there in a very bloody nightgown. Recognizing that something had to be wrong, he grabbed his gun and fired it into the air to alert the neighbors. The response to that, being that this was a close-knit rural community, was very rapid. A nearby neighbor named Elmer Taylor heard the gunshot and drove his car over to Prater's, where everyone there piled inside before Elmer squealed out and headed straight for the hospital. Because of the quick actions of her neighbors, Katie Starks actually ended up surviving this ordeal, but unfortunately, her husband did not. As Katie Starks was on her way to the hospital, Miller County Chief Deputy Tillman Johnson was on his way out to the Stark residence. He had been back home for less than a week after spending 2 years in the military when he had received the radio call that there had been another shooting, and that the attacker might be the same perpetrator of the previous attacks. Johnson wasted little time, and along with 20 to 30 law officers from both Texas and Arkansas, converged on the Starks' home and quickly attempted to secure the crime scene with whatever they could find, while also trying to question neighbors. This was more difficult than it otherwise might have seemed, though, because the residents of the area were now completely terrified, and because they all lived out in a rural area, they were also all very well armed. Johnson would later say, "We went to other people's homes in the area to see if they had heard or seen anything, but people would stand out near the front of their homes and yell at you to identify yourself before you got too close. You had to, or you would get shot." Unfortunately, despite arriving relatively quickly after the attacks, the crime scene quickly became just as chaotic as the previous ones. Police from all over the area had sped to the farmhouse as soon as word of the attack came in. Neighbors quickly headed over to see what had happened, and despite attempts to cordon off the scene, the house was kind of wide open and people were just walking all around. To make matters worse, the living room was filled with smoke from Virgil Stark's heating pad, which had shorted out after he had been killed and was now burning. However, once the smoke literally cleared, investigators were able to tell that Virgil had been shot twice in the back of his head. And in addition to the trail of blood that Katie had left behind, investigators also found bloody footprints throughout the living room, which they believed could have come from the killer checking to see if Virgil was dead, or potentially from someone else who had just wandered through the crime scene. That, unfortunately, would make it difficult for them to tell what shoes the killer was wearing, because if they didn't know that they were the killer's shoes for sure, you see what the problem is. But there was one thing about this specific crime scene that they thought might help them figure it out. This was a rare type of flashlight which they believed belonged to the attacker. Oddly enough, nothing seemed to have been stolen from the house, and while police dogs were able to track a scent along the highway, they lost it after about half a mile. But while this at first had seemed like a promising next step in figuring out who the murderer was, they suddenly had to ask themselves if this was the same killer. You see, as the evidence at the Starks home piled up, investigators were split as to whether or not this case could actually be linked to the previous murders. Part of the reason for this was that the bullets removed from Virgil's body, as well as some of the shell casings found in the area, were from a .22 caliber weapon, whereas all 4 previous victims had been shot with a .32 caliber pistol. Then there was the obvious difference between the 3 young couples attacked while in cars versus the Starks, who were closer to middle age and attacked in their own home. Despite these differing opinions, however, investigators decided to include the Starks attack in their investigation, which is just, once again, not how that should have gone. That said, it is somewhat understandable that they reacted this way, and to be fair, Texarkana residents were less concerned about the inconsistencies between the attacks than they were with their own safety. You see, 3 weeks had passed between each of the attacks, and 3 weeks after the Starks attack, Texarkana residents were in a collective, vibrating state of panic. You know, this violence was different than normal. This was a concentrated burst with a large number of victims repeating at what seemed to be a static rate. Residents were living in fear not only that another attack was coming, but also of the fact that the killer might be living among them. And, as often happens with these small-town horror stories, a large number of out-of-town reporters were writing the most attention-grabbing stories they could come up with, even if that meant that they were basically coming up with them. All around Texarkana, women whose husbands worked out of town were checking into hotels with their kids for the sake of safety and numbers, and those who couldn't afford to check into the hotel would rig up homemade security systems, doing things like stringing up pots and pans around their property. Kids slept in their parents' rooms on makeshift beds, and even people who had never been gun owners ended up purchasing firearms, often sleeping with them loaded on their bedside tables. Which, generally, that would not be an advisable decision, but when there's a murderer on the loose. Now, all of this behavior speaks to the fact that this specific attack freaked people out more than anything else. And that was largely because it wasn't against young people out in a parked car. which was something that had previously allowed older residents to feel like they wouldn't really be a target. No, this had been a home invasion, which meant that now everyone was vulnerable. Before long, stores were sold out of things like guns and ammunition. Privacy items like curtains and blinds flew off the shelves, people started locking their doors and boarding up their windows, and nightlife in the area just totally shut down. On top of all of that, the paranoia got to the point where if you wanted to go visit somebody's house after dark, you damn well better call them and let them know you were coming so that they didn't just shoot you when you showed up. All of this came to a head when, not long after the attack on the Starks, a neighbor of that family called the Miller County Sheriff's Office to report strange lights coming out of the empty house. Now, this was alarming, considering the house was supposed to be closed up and off limits, and as a result, officers raced over to the farmhouse, then fanned out with their weapons drawn, and screamed that they had the house surrounded, and whoever was in there should come out with their hands up. Now, remember when I mentioned how Ranger Captain Gonzalez would give female reporters a private crime scene tour?
Oh my god.
This is why that was relevant. After having essentially the entire police force of the whole area show up and set up a perimeter, the lone wolf just kind of stepped out of the house, followed by a woman. She was a photographer from Life and Time magazines, and Gonzalez explained that he'd been reenacting the crime for her while she took pictures.
Oh my god.
And this just kind of gives you an idea of what police work looked like on these cases. It's not particularly surprising that they never caught the guy who did it, partially because any modern investigator looking at this would tell you that there's almost no chance that the Starks attack was related to the ones in Texarkana. But, you know, the fact that you had a Texas Ranger, somebody who should have been one of the primary law enforcement officers on the scene, doing something like that is beyond the pale. It is utterly impossible between that and just the lack of crime scene security to know how much evidence was lost thanks to bystanders and untrained law enforcement trampling through these crime scenes. What is pretty remarkable is that despite all of these problems, nearly 400 people were arrested and questioned during the series of investigations which followed. Now, of course, of those 400, most were kind of just let go and not considered to be suspects in any serious sense. But there were a number, both at the time and as things changed later on, who really did pique law enforcement's interest. Like I just said, there were a lot of suspects, but there were really only a few who have ever been seriously considered, or at the very least, interesting. So let's start with a classic here, that being the Zodiac Killer. You see, the Phantom and his crimes carry more than a passing resemblance to the Zodiac Killer, who 20 years later would terrorize residents in the San Francisco Bay Area. The idea that the Zodiac Killer was perfecting his crimes in Texarkana is something of a pet theory among some online sleuths, and involves someone in Texarkana having a cousin from California staying with them at the same time that these phantom murders were happening. Unfortunately, we still don't know who the Zodiac Killer was, which makes it very difficult to figure out if there would be any potential chance of him being here. It's not like Ted Bundy with the Betsy Yards murder, where people said, oh, well, what if it was him? He was in Pennsylvania around that time, and we're like, no, we know who Ted Bundy was, and we know for a fact that he was having Thanksgiving dinner with his girlfriend at the time, and very much not in State College, Pennsylvania. I'll probably go into a little bit more on this, and I'll cover it in some more detail. We've been wanting to do a Zodiac Killer video, so I just need to make that happen. So I will do my sleuthing on that, on his potential involvement in a dedicated video to him. And to be clear, I'm not just writing that off for no reason. It potentially could have been the Zodiac Killer, but there were better suspects. One of the first was a longtime and well-respected Texarkana resident who was known only by the pseudonym Sammy. He came onto the police radar because after the murders of Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker, police matched tire tracks they'd found nearby to this individual. Now, as for why we only know him as Sammy, well, I'll explain. You see, this guy was in his mid-30s with a good reputation and criminal history, but between the tire tracks and the fact that he failed a polygraph exam, they had to give him a look. However, when Sammy agreed to be hypnotized, investigators soon understood that the reason he had failed the polygraph was because he was hiding something, just not the thing they were looking for. As it turned out, Sammy had been in the area and had left those tire tracks, because he was visiting a married woman who he obviously should not have been visiting. This was good enough for the police to determine that it probably wasn't him, and because there didn't appear to be any criminal reason that he'd been in the area, they did not want to tarnish his reputation by putting his real name into the papers. Next on the list was a 21-year-old ex-Army Air Force machine gunner named Ralph Bauman. And the weird part about this suspect is that he came forward because he thought he might be the Phantom.
What?
But he couldn't totally remember. This thin, red-haired man claimed that he had been in a mental blackout for the last 6 weeks and wouldn't rest easy until he found out if it had been him who killed all 5 victims. Bauman was actually arrested in Los Angeles at a shooting gallery, allegedly after registering 23 bullseyes in a row, and reportedly told police, "I've been in a coma, running from something, maybe murder. I want to clear it up. If I didn't kill those people in Texarkana, I want to settle down and be a stuntman in Hollywood." So he was eliminated as a suspect pretty quickly after that. Now, if any of these stories seem like they lack details or like they might contradict themselves or anything, there's a reason for that, and that reason is that most of the sources for these are rather dubious, and that the Texarkana Daily News is not easy to find for these dates on any of the archive sites. You kind of got to travel to Texarkana and go to the public library and read the microfilms. That, or you can rely on the aforementioned book with the very long name, which I did read, even though I, again, did not write most of this video. I did not find the author particularly trustworthy. It's not that I think he's lying, it's just that I would like to verify many of the things he said myself before quoting them with my whole chest, you might say. Bauman's story is just kind of weird. Like, it's hard to tell if he turned himself in. It seems like he did. He also said that he hitchhiked from Texarkana out to Los Angeles and that he had sneaking suspicion. Part of me wonders if this was all some ploy to get his name in the papers so that when he went to audition for movies, people were like, "Hey, isn't that the guy who thought he killed a bunch of people?" And then, I don't know why he might think that would work, but that's show business, baby. Anyway, a slightly more plausible candidate for the Phantom Killer of Texarkana was Henry Booker Tennyson, who was an 18-year-old university freshman at the time of the murders. He also did have the unfortunate nickname of Duty, which was a name given to him by his mother, who must have just hated him. Now, the thing about Henry Booker Tennyson is that he was not immediately a suspect. Instead, they came across him in 1948 because that winter, he took his own life by drinking mercury cyanide. His landlady was the one who discovered his body, and when she called police to the home, investigators came across some of the most confusing evidence they'd ever seen. You see, Tennyson was a fan of radio detective stories, and that showed because among his personal effects was a poem he had written which promised that if the reader could solve the puzzle it contained, it would reveal how to open a lockbox in his room. Now, I could tell you that police spent, months or even years trying to decode what was in this lockbox, seeking down every potential meaning in the poem, but they took a more direct route and just kind of smashed it. Now, once they had smashed the box open, what they found inside was a letter, and the letter read as follows. "Why did I take my own life? You may be asking that question. Well, when you committed 2 double murders, you would. Yes, I did kill Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin in the city park that night, and kill Mr. Stark and try to get Mrs. Stark. You wouldn't have guessed it. I did it when Mother was either out of sleep and no one saw me do it." Now, while that seems like a pretty straightforward confession of murder, Tennyson also left a letter out in the open, seemingly one that he hoped police would find and release publicly, which didn't mention the murders at all. It begins, "Please disregard all other messages which I have written. They are only my thoughts which I was thinking about as possible reasons for taking my own life." He goes on to say, "As I think about it, it is none of these things. They are not the reason for this incident. There's a much larger point to it all." The letter then goes on to explain that he wants his family to be happy and that now his parents wouldn't have to worry about him or spend more money on him or his education. So he likely wrote this public letter in a way that carefully talked around the murders, only wanting that first lot confession to be read by his family. He didn't count on police going ham on the strongbox. Now, those who knew Tennyson described him as introverted and shy. He'd apparently just hit a growth spurt, reaching 6 foot 4 inches tall, but staying 130 pounds. Authorities at his university told police that he had been cutting classes for about 2 weeks, but was still getting passing grades, and one of Tennyson's friends gave him an alibi for the night of the Starks attack, while his prints did not match those found in the Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker case. On top of all that, Tennyson's sister said that he didn't know anything about guns, and he hadn't even known how to drive at the time of the murders, while his brothers said that they felt his confession was the result of reading too many comic magazines. It is worth noting, though, that the Tennysons were an old Texarkana family and seemed to be pretty well connected. For example, Henry's parents were friends with J.Q. Maffei, the editor of the Texarkana Gazette. And in fact, it was Maffei who spoke to the press on behalf of some members of the Tennyson family. Now, whether they believed that Henry was the Phantom or not, his confession did seemingly come out of nowhere, and it's understandable that they would scramble and use their press connections to do some damage control, if that's what this was. And while retellings of this story often report that Tennyson's first letter disavowed the locked confession, it's possible to read this another way. When he said to please disregard all other messages which I have written, he may have meant disregard them as reasons for his self-inflicted death. It's also possible that he wanted to explain that this final act wasn't impulsive or done out of guilt for his crimes, but was rather something that he had thought deeply about and had done as a way to ease the burden he felt he was putting on his loved ones. As skewed as that mentality was, because his family obviously didn't view him as a burden and would have wanted him alive, it seems like Tennyson was genuinely struggling with his mental health. Whether those struggles were caused, at least in part, by his role as the Texarkana Phantom, however, will never be known for sure. Perhaps the most frequently cited suspect of all of them, however, was U.L. Swinney, who at the age of just 29 was already a career criminal, albeit for smaller crimes like theft, burglary, and counterfeiting. Tall and thin, with frankly gorgeous eyes, I'll let you guess who wrote that part, Swinney had already spent time at a reform school, 2 state penitentiaries, federal prisons in Oklahoma, Georgia, and Kansas, and by the summer of 1946, had only been out of the Texas penitentiary for about 6 months. Swinney came onto the police radar after Trooper Max Tackett noticed that for each night of the assault or murder, a car had been stolen from Texarkana, and a different stolen car was found abandoned. And around this same time, Swinney's landlord grew sick of him not paying his rent and called the cops, and in the process of doing so, gave them his license plate number, which turned out to be for a stolen car. Thinking that this connection might lead to a break in the case, police decided to set up a few stakeouts, and it wasn't long before they apprehended Peggy Swinney, who was U.L. Swinney's new wife of just 1 day, as she went to pick up yet a different stolen car. As it turned out, Peggy and UL had actually met in jail and gotten married that very morning, which would prove to be advantageous for both of them. The biggest piece of evidence people point to when talking about UL Swinney's guilt appears to be a statement he made to the police. When Trooper Tackett finally cornered Swinney on a fire escape, the man allegedly commented, "You want me for more than stealing cars? I will spend the rest of my life behind bars this time," before later asking officers if he would get the electric chair. That struck police as odd because they had never brought up the death penalty, nor told Swinney that they were after him for anything other than having a stolen car. So, what did this man think they were arresting him for? Problem was that investigators struggled to get enough evidence against Swinney, and they couldn't hold him forever. They did have some circumstantial evidence, that being that no murders happened once Swinney was behind bars, and his most recent conviction had been for robbery by assault, which pointed to violent tendencies. He also didn't have an alibi for any of the crimes, and his own sister claimed she'd found a shirt with the name Stark on it amongst his things. And that shirt was later found to have metal fragments in the pocket, which could have come from Virgil Stark's welding shop. Katie Starks herself would eventually confirm that the shirt was her husband's, only to later recant that statement, saying that she couldn't be sure. Though whether that was because she genuinely couldn't be sure, or because she was just a little bit of doubt and knew that positively identifying that shirt could send a man to his death, it could just be that she didn't want blood on her hands, basically. So, while they did have a good amount of circumstantial evidence, they didn't have quite enough, and it also didn't help that neither Peggy nor UL's fingerprints matched those found in Paul Martin's car. So what police really needed was Peggy Swinney's testimony. Being as she was now married to their prime suspect, they could not compel her to testify against him, but in 3 separate statements to police, Peggy first danced around giving any solid dates, then gave herself alibis for the nights of the crimes, while telling police that UL had left for hours, before finally admitting that both of them had been there for the Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker murders, although she painted herself as an unwilling participant. Unfortunately, her stories were all over the place. She would make statements and then retract them, and investigators struggled to figure out if the inconsistencies were caused by her fear of UL, the booze she'd been drinking during some of the events, an attempt to hide her own involvement in the crimes, or, as Miller County Sheriff's Deputy Tillman Johnson colorfully put it, her bread wasn't brown, the elevator didn't go all the way to the top. I believe these are archaic ways of saying she wasn't all there. In the end, Peggy provided a signed statement confirming the couple's involvement in the Spring Lake Park murders. However, police also intercepted a note she wrote to her parents after her first interview, where she told them that she had lied to investigators. Ultimately, though, whether or not Peggy was telling the truth is a moot point. She had just married UL, and again, as his wife, she could not be compelled to testify against him. Now, James Presley, the author of the triple-titled book we're referencing here, is the nephew of Bowie County Sheriff Bill Presley, and he may have inside information because he states in his book that police decided to make an unofficial plea bargain with UL Swinney. The way Presley tells it, investigators on the Texas side were hesitant to charge a man with a capital crime based only on circumstantial evidence. What they could do, however, was charge Swinney as a habitual criminal. If they convicted him on a charge that was easy to prove, like car theft, they could use all his admitted thefts and previous convictions to show that he deserved a life sentence under the Habitual Criminal Act. Even if he wasn't convicted as the Phantom, it would get him off the street for life. And at the end of the day, this is what happened. UL Swinney was eventually convicted of auto theft and sentenced to life in prison, which was better than the death sentence he likely would have received if he had been convicted of Virgil Stark's murder in Arkansas. Now, as you've probably picked up, this is one of those cases where the crime scenes were just a mess, evidence was likely lost or destroyed before police ever had a chance to find it, suspects were infuriatingly unhelpful, and it was all long enough ago that it's unlikely new evidence will ever be found. It could be that UL Swinney was the man who did it, but it also could be that they just needed somebody to point the finger at, and he was an easy target. Now, thankfully, given how much time has passed, residents of Texarkana seem to have come to peace with their town's infamous boogeyman. They have an annual screening of The Town That Dreaded Sundown, the 1976 horror film loosely based on the murders. Local speakeasy, the 1923 Banana Club, hosts an immersive dinner theater experience called An Evening with the Phantom, and the documentary Killer Legends even posits the idea that the Hook, the famous urban legend about a man with a hook for a hand who terrorizes people on lovers' lanes, was inspired by the Texarkana Phantom. If you're not familiar with the Hook, you may be familiar with the line, "She gets out to check and man door hand hook car door." Now, as for the man who was considered their prime suspect and the one who went away for the crimes for all intents and purposes, UL Swinney died in a nursing home in Dallas in 1994. Out of all the suspects, he is the one mentioned most in connection with the murders. However, no one has ever officially been charged with being the Phantom Killer of Texarkana. After all, phantoms are, by definition, elusive. Now, personally, I am inclined to think that UL Swinney makes the most sense of all of the people who were suggested as suspects. The problem with Peggy Dolan Swinney is that his history of crimes did not show that kind of violence. I mean, again, we're talking theft, burglary, counterfeiting, things like that. These are not inherently violent crimes. Meanwhile, the Phantom Killer, at the very least, was beating people, and at the very worst, was assaulting them in an intimate way and then shooting them. It did occur to me while I was reading through everything for my research on it that this could have been a moral enforcer kind of situation. It could have also been an issue of somebody who was, I can't remember the exact term for it off the top of my head, but somebody who is incapable of arising to the occasion and takes it out on others using violence. Now, personally, I don't think that the Starks murder had anything to do with the Texarkana ones. I think these are totally isolated incidents. Or maybe somebody had something against Starks and wanted to get rid of him and figured that police would do precisely what they did. To me, it seems much more likely that the three murders that happened on Lovers' Lanes in Texarkana were the ones that were connected to one another, and that it had something to do with moral enforcement or something along those lines. The profiling just doesn't match for those three attacks with the Starks murder. I'd have a hard time buying it. The one thing that sticks out to me about all three murders, or I guess I should say would stick out, is that it does seem like the victims might have been picked earlier that night. What I mean by that is that we have the first two couples went to movies together, and then the third couple, as far as anybody knows, the last time anybody recalls seeing Paul and Betty Jo together was when he was picking her up from the VFW, but it could be that they went to see a movie that night. If they did, that means that all three couples went to the movies before they were attacked, which would suggest that the killer was somebody who either hung out at the movie theater or potentially somebody who worked there. On the other hand, it could also be that this was somebody who was more of a moral enforcer type and knew to just wait by the lovers' lanes to see if somebody would show up and then, do their thing. Honestly, for me, what I'm most interested in about the whole thing now is the potential connection to the Zodiac Killer. I'm going to add that one to the list. I can't believe I haven't done a video on the Zodiac Killer yet. That is genuinely shocking to me. That one I definitely will be writing myself also because I just want to dive into it. So with that said, I do want to thank Bethany Watson for doing, again, I didn't write any of this. I ad-libbed a little bit, but I did not write any of this video. So please let me know if you liked this one. We would love to give Bethany some more work. And it would take a load off of me if I was able to write one fewer video a month and focus on all the other videos I have to write. God, I would like to get back to the John Bonet series. I'd also like to thank Fume for sponsoring this video and to tell you that the best way you can catch up on our videos, be notified that things are happening, well, one is to hit the notification bell because YouTube really likes when you do that, but you can also check us out at our Discord, which is bit.ly/jointhelodge. You can also join us over on Patreon, where we post these episodes ad-free, and you can check out more Lodge by heading over to my personal channel, The Aiden Mattis. You can go to History Unhinged for our history podcast with Stephen Bell. You can check out Weird Bible. That actually does have new content coming.
We did the base.
Might be a once-off, but we might actually have this moving forward now. So that does have new content coming. It's an interview about the question of evil with Andrew Briggs. We also have Corbert's channel, Civil Attention, where he goes into the story of how movies...
Yeah, okay, buddy. Alright, buddy. Okay. Well, yeah. Did a bit of work on him, not bad. A lot of the base pieces done. I don't know, I kind of want to add more with the hands. I don't know. Next time I guess I'll work on coloring them in, a bit of shading, and then make his frames. So we worked on that for a couple of hours today. I think that's definitely enough. I'm gonna head off and do the other things that I need to do. So thank you for hanging out with me today. It was nice. A little chill time. And I will see you on tomorrow. Actually, Friday, tomorrow. We'll play some more Union and read some more Cave Story. See you then. Have a good rest of the day or good rest of the night, whatever the hecky time zone. Have a good day. Otsumaru. Bye bye. Mata ne.
Cheap shots on me, so drink up, honey, this one's for free. a little bit deeper on these values in which I strive. I'll be your sleeper hit. Let me take this thing in an overdrive. Let me take this thing in an overdrive. Yeah, on the rocks. Minds are wrecked. Now they tell me everything will be okay. Well, I wanna be the hunter, not the hunted. I wanna be the killer, not the prey. My heart can't take much more. Constantly repeating every single beat I've heard before. Every single time I hit that wall. Crystal bodies hold me tight as I fall into the night. Oh, just for a chance to see the light. Beating of the drum that I heard so many times I became numb. Are we constantly tormented just for fun? We'll never understand. The cure is starting up. Hold your breath and plunge too deep. My demons always had my soul to keep. And I'm dying every time I fall asleep. I wanna be reborn instead of being done. My mind's a wreck. Oh, I used to believe